Hey, did Dr. Klein ever explain why opioids are depressants but also give you, like, the feeling of being high?
Actually, I specifically wrote that he did not complete it, even though he said he would explain it.
Really?
Well, maybe there's some review journals or something that go into more detail.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, so apparently a lot of research has been done on how synthetic opioids affect neurotransmission in spinal nerves, specifically on nociceptive pathways.
What did you just say? Nociceptive?
Nociceptive pathways are basically pain pathways, so like noise receptors on your fingertips.
Actually, a lot of research has been done in rats, but some of them were actually in cats. Imagine if we did research on cats.
Well, that'd be pretty interesting.
You have a cat, right? I've got a pretty steady hand.
Oh my god, no. Don't even think about that. That's so weird.
It could work. It could work.
It could.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good. So I was doing some more research on opiates, specifically synthetic opiates.
Okay.
And there's a really neat sounding chemical. You guess what it's called? It's DAMGO.
Oh, okay.
If you look at these slides I prepared, you'll see that DAMGO stands for part of the amino acid chain it's made of. You could read, so I won't spell it out. But apparently DAMGO is a very potent drug, and expensive too. Most of the studies with opiates have dealt with either analgesia or nociception, but not a lot of people have actually done work on the influence of these opiates on reflexes and stuff.
Oh yeah, I actually read a study that showed how one of the delta receptor agonists didn't show specificity for nociceptive versus non-nociceptive pathways, but instead for flexor motor reflexes versus non-flexor motor reflexes.
You know, this leads me to believe opioids might play a role in reflexes that is just as significant, if not more so, than its role in suppressing sensation.
So if we tested this on cats, we definitely need access to their spinal cords. So we'd have to put our neural lab surgery skills to work.
Yeah, we'll probably have to use some single-cell recording, too. All right, let's do this.
Yeah, let the science begin.
Music is a world within itself, with a language we all understand, with an equal opportunity for all to sing, dance, and clap their hands. Just because of
All right, thank you all for being here today. I'm Sarah Turner. I'm part of the research team headed by Dr. McCorkle, and hopefully you'll enjoy our presentation. Emily, if you could dim the lights.
The model subjects for this experiment were cats of either gender. In order to get high spinal preparations that did not have influence from supraspinal loops and without the effects of anesthetic drugs, the cats were anemically decapitated by ligation of both common carotid arteries, their branches, and the ascending vertebral arteries. After the cats were fully anesthetized and paralyzed, electrodes were then placed in the dorsal and ventral roots of the L5 to L7 and S1 vertebrae to record MR activity. MRs were stimulated through electrode stimulation in the studied leg muscles. DAMGO was administered both intravenously and through spinal suffusion. The only difference between the suffused spinal administration and the direct IV injection was the time course. Naloxone was also administered approximately 1 to 2 hours after the initial DAMGO administration in order to stem DAMGO's effects. During this time, electrodes placed in the dorsal and ventral horns of the L5 to L7 and S1 vertebrae recorded MRs. Overall, the results of the study showed that the opioidergic spinal functions are extensively involved in the suppression of nociceptor motor withdrawal reactions and the spinal motor control that allows for such reflexes. Concerning the MRs, the experiment revealed that the unconditioned MR of the reflexor PBST decreased after DAMGO application. With a mean depression of greater than 50%, the decrease was shown to be significant. The naloxone not only returned the size of the unconditional MRs of the PBST to the control reflex size, but exceeded it. In contrast, the GC reflex increased in amplitude when reacted with DAMGO. The effect of naloxone was dependent on the time at which the DAMGO was administered. The MR of PBST was facilitated by nociceptor afferents of the central pad, as was expected. After the application of DAMGO, the facilitatory conditioning effects of all tested afferents to PBST motor neurons were heavily reduced.
The findings of this study could aid with future research studies and the understanding of how motor pathways are influenced by drug usage. These findings could also be used to study the neurological effects of opioid abuse or to expand upon our knowledge of painkillers.
If we were to replicate this experiment, we would mainly focus on one motor pathway or one set of motor pathways to determine the detailed effects of DAMGO on the chosen pathway. There were many pathways tested in this experiment, and it became a cluster of general results. We would have picked a different animal model, such as rats, to replicate this experiment multiple times, since only 16 cats were used and this was not a sufficient sample size. We would have liked to analyze the opioid receptors in greater detail and discuss the main differences in their purposes and mechanisms in this experiment. Finally, we would like to test the DAMGO and its effects in the central nervous system instead of the peripheral nervous system in order to study painkillers' influence on the brain.